Hello out there, and welcome to Wine, Women, and Writing. This is Pamela Fagan Hutchins, and you have reached the show where I talk with other writers, especially female writers, nothing against the guys, but the focus of the show is on really great, complex, authentic female characters. So I tend to find that I have a few more female authors I talk to than men. Today's no exception. I do want to invite you out to my website, PamelaFaganHutchins.com, where you can see past shows and actually view them or listen to them. And you can also see upcoming shows. And that way you can read the books ahead of time. So when I talk to these authors, you're already ready to drop your great questions out into the atmosphere and hope we're going to answer them. I do this show live, and I do it via video and via audio. So whichever you have found it on, do please enjoy. And know that this is a copyrighted and solely owned production of Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. All hail our producer, Pam Stack. We appreciate her so much. And I want now to take a second to introduce you to our guest, who is a multiple-time Silver Falchion winner and a very, very successful suspense mystery thriller type of writer. Her name is Kathryn Lane. Welcome to the show, Kathryn.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you today.
I am so excited that you're here. Now, Kathryn and I actually first met a couple of years ago in Nashville, if I'm not incorrect. That was our first time, right?
Yes. Yes, it was.
It was a pretty exciting weekend for you, as I recall, too, if you want to tell people about what happened.
Well, it was an exciting weekend for both of us because you also won a Silver Falchion. Well, I was there because I had just published my first novel, and we entered it into the contest, and I had a publisher at that time, and we went to Nashville, not knowing, of course, anything about it because I'd been in the corporate world, and I just was there for the experience and to meet other writers and to sort of get a feel for things. And as it turned out, we were asked to make sure that we went to the fellow Clay staffer that puts it on, said, we want you to get the whole experience. So please make sure you're at the dinner, the awards dinner. I said, yes, we'll be there. We've got tickets. We'll be there. Well, much to my surprise, I won the best suspense category with Waking Up in Medellin. And as I said, it was my very first novel. I was blown away. My husband started crying. It was a very emotional experience. And because there were so many other writers there that had so much more experience, I never dreamed that I would win anything. And I certainly didn't have anything prepared. So then my husband says, well, we've eaten and you won an award. And why don't we're tired. Let's go back up to the room. I said, we can't do that. That would be terrible. That's terrible. We're staying till the very end. Besides, this is my first experience. I want to meet other people. I want to see, what goes on. And it was so exciting. And so then they get to the final award, which is the best fiction book of the year. And they call out the finalists, and then they call out the winner, and it is Waking Up in Medellin by Kathryn Lane. Well, if my husband had been crying before, I mean, he literally passed out. They needed to pull him off in an ambulance. And I had to get up and say something, and I was speechless. I couldn't say anything. And I kept standing there thinking, okay, something will come to me. And it never did. I just said something stupid and then sat back down. It was the most exciting experience. Just absolutely, totally unexpected. And and as a consequence, of course, it really made me feel much more comfortable about switching careers. I left the corporate world and I wanted to write because it was something I just needed to do. So it was very validating.
Well, it was exciting. And I've got to tell you, we've got feedback, and I don't know if it sounds like it's coming from your speakers. I don't know if you can turn me down, the sound of me down a little bit. But while we're talking about that Silver Falchion Award, I want to tell you guys that for authors that are with small to medium publishers or independent, they're blocked out of a lot of different types of awards that they can go for. You cannot be considered for some of the biggest awards. And yet, there's so many really great books that are put out by small publishers and medium-sized publishers and even independent publishers that you very quickly start to feel like, why can't I go against the best of the best? Why can't I? It just doesn't make sense. So I'm not going to go off on a whole riff about this, because I think books should be considered regardless of where they came from, based upon merit, not even popularity in the industry, but merit for these different awards. But there is one award that really is prestigious and that is open to any type of publisher, and that's the Silver Falchion. So it's very exciting when an indie or a small to medium publisher, like you were at the time, breaks to the top, because we don't have those legions of New York editors and publicists behind us, etc. It's not equal footing. And then to make it there and to beat out the contenders who are traditionally published by bigger houses in New York is so amazing for Kathryn. It is so incredible. And Waking Up in Medellin was very deserving. So I just had to throw that in, because most people listening just read books and don't realize that there's this whole caste system, of ability to be considered for and win awards. And the last thing I'll say on this is, I don't know about you, but when I was looking at who was up for these awards that particular year, a lot of them were books I really loved that didn't make the finals. And then when the finals came, it was, at least in my category, it was me and New York. And it was really intimidating to go, and yet so super exciting when, for starters, two people not with the big houses, and seconders, two Houston women swept their categories in overall, because it turned out we're both from, or at least part of the year, the city of Houston.
That's right. That's right. And it was great. And I think that what you've said about the awards there is so meaningful. And just as it validated me as a writer, there are so many other people that it's validated to, that Killer Nashville has really validated it. It adds so much to the lives of authors.
It really does. And it's amazing. They have done a super job, and they have really broke the award out in prestige, to the top of the pack. So Waking Up in Medellin was number one. Now we have number three that's recently published. Number two was
Danger in the Coyote Zone. And it was a finalist at Killer Nashville in the thriller category. And it did win an award in California that was Latino Books into Movies, because of course the protagonist is a Latina woman. And it's and then number three obviously is what we're going to be talking about today, Revenge in Barcelona.
Revenge in Barcelona. Now, so before we get into the book, I want to lay a backdrop here. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into writing, the steps that led to the creation of Nikki Garcia. It's not a short story, but it's a good one. How young Kathryn in Mexico became Kathryn Lane in the US writing these thrillers.
Well, even though my name belies the fact that I'm Mexican, I am. And I grew up in a small town, about 200,000 people in the general area. And it was a wonderful part of Mexico to grow up in. And you mentioned the bilingual aspect. Yes, I started speaking English when I was 12 years old, but I actually started studying it when I was about 9 years old, but didn't really want to speak it. So wonderful place to grow up. But I also always knew that I wanted to travel the world. But I didn't have a ton of money to travel, and I wanted to be a painter in oils, and I wanted to be a landscape painter and portrait painter and so on. Well, at that time, I didn't realize that that just didn't make any money. It led to a starving artist lifestyle. So I had to switch gears, went to the University of New Mexico, and after finishing my fine arts degree, I went into the MBA program at the University of New Mexico and became a CPA and studied finance. Excuse me, I'm going to have to take a sip of water.
Please do.
And
by the way, everyone's a Lobo, woof, woof, woof. My husband went to the University of New Mexico as well, as we've talked about before.
That's right. Yes, that is correct. That's correct. It's a great university. I loved it. So then I became a CPA and I worked in public accounting for 3.5 years. And the first year I was making more money than I had ever dreamed I would make. And of course, it wasn't a lot, but for me, it was a lot. And I thought, this is fantastic. Doing taxes is so great. The second year rolled around and I thought, what was it about last year that I enjoyed doing taxes? By the third year, I was ready to slit my wrists. Because keep in mind, I really have more of an artistic personality than an accounting, finance, certainly tax person. But then I found out that large corporations were very interested in hiring bilingual people, English, Spanish, with accounting backgrounds that could be internal auditors. There was tremendous demand for it. So I interviewed with 7 companies, got 6 job offers. I thought, and I joined Johnson & Johnson, and that was a fabulous decision because I loved working for them. I was with them for almost 20 years, and 18 of those years were fabulous. The last 2 were the reason I left early because I didn't enjoy those anymore, but that's another story. And my first 6 years at J&J, I was an international fraud auditor. And for that, I had to have a lot of special training. And there were a few times, I never encountered anything that was particularly dangerous, but there were a few times that there were some things that I uncovered that were very, very interesting. So fast forward, I take over the region and for finance, and I travel in the Caribbean. I had responsibility for all of Latin America and the Caribbean. Fabulous job. I'd also done a lot of other travel for J&J throughout Europe, Asia. I traveled a total of 90 countries for J&J. So a lot of stories to be told from that experience. Anyway, I then decided that, my job just isn't as exciting as it used to be. So I think I want to go back into the arts. But by then, I didn't want to be a painter anymore. I thought, it would be so nice to write about some of these experiences and place novels in the different areas that I've been, because I was in Medellin, Colombia, at the time that Pablo Escobar, the big drug lord, at the time one of the richest men in the world, escaped from his self-imposed and self-constructed prison just outside of Medellin. It was called La Catedral, the cathedral. And all companies withdrew their people immediately because Pablo Escobar had escaped, and they expected, I don't know what they expected. And J&J was no different. They called me and said, you've got to get out. And I said, he's not going to bother me. I'm in Cali, Colombia. He's in Medellin. I'm going to finish this job. And so I did. But all of those ideas just kept stacking up in my mind. I wish to some degree I'd written something down at that time. I never had time to really write. But so then I decided that I would take an early retirement because I really wanted to write. It seemed to be something I needed to do. So where was I going to start? Well, I had been an international fraud auditor. And just like John Grisham is a former attorney that writes about lawyers, I thought, well, I'm a former fraud auditor that can write about a fraud auditor. Nikki Garcia is pure fiction, but there's a kernel of truth, obviously, and I've just told you that kernel of truth. And so she goes off, she's working for a major multinational corporation in the US, and she is sent to Medellin, Colombia, for a fraud audit. And of course, she finds a whole lot more than just fraud. And she also finds a love interest. But we'll cut it there because that's enough about waking up in Miami. But that's how I got started in writing.
I love that. I love the authenticity that you bring to Nikki as a character, while she's not a replica of Kathryn Lane, yet her experiences ring true because these are things that you've lived. And now she is moving in the books through different locations, and just like you, is traveling the world with a little bit of danger, a little bit of excitement, and a little bit of passion as well because of that love interest, which brings us to Revenge in Barcelona. So tell me a little bit about the book. Tell us all a little bit about Nikki Part 3.
Well, Nikki Part 3. In Part 2, she had done a kidnapping case in Mexico, and she's at the end of that job, and she starts getting some very serious death threats, and decides to leave that behind, let other people finish off the job, and she's going to take a much needed vacation in Barcelona, Spain. And she takes, of course, Eduardo with her. And when she is in Spain, thinking that what a wonderful place, to spend 3 weeks and just vacation and not think about anything, she witnesses a terrorist attack on a major tourist attraction, which is Gaudi's Sagrada Familia Basilica, that attracts like 4.5 million people a year. And then she realizes that this attack was not on the basilica itself, but they were after her. So the rest of the novel is about figuring out who is after her and how she can protect herself. And of course, being in a foreign country, she has to rely on a few other things, such as Interpol and a connection she has at Interpol. And so it's a very, for me, it was an interesting plot to put together because I didn't want her there as a private investigator. I really wanted her there as a private citizen, to make it that much more difficult for her to figure out what on earth was going on because she had limited access to information.
One of the things I enjoyed a lot about it, besides that I haven't been to Barcelona, and now I feel like I have, with the wonderful foot tour that we got with Eduardo and Nikki, and in the different landmarks, but there was a little bit of flamenco in the book, and I'm wearing a little. This isn't flamenco. It's just red and black, but it's the best I could do. So there was this authentic and sensual and gritty spice. You do a great job with food. And even though we were in Barcelona, we were also getting influx of cultures that were coming across from other countries. We were getting the deep cultural and religious history that is Barcelona, and the different pieces of the society there. It was rich. It was really rich. And for people that enjoy travel, for people that enjoy culture and history, this book is just a treat.
Well, thank you, Pamela. Well, the attraction for me is that Barcelona is my favorite city in the world. I have been traveling there for the last 30 years, and I thought I just have to place a book there. I just have to set Nikki in Barcelona. And I do like for people to feel that they're in a place, because I have read novels that have had a wonderful plot and it's been a wonderful story and they're in a foreign country, but you don't get, or I don't get much of a feel for that foreign country other than a few things that they mention. So I try very, very much to include, just as you include landscape in yours, your Wyoming and Texas descriptions are incredible. I try to include those cityscapes, and Barcelona lends itself because there are so many monuments. It's the number one place to see Gaudí architecture because there's very little architecture of his in any other place but Barcelona and the surrounding areas. But also the melding of cultures. Spain has always been a crossroads, going back to the ancient Romans. that obviously took over Spain for many years. And then the Muslims came in and they conquered Spain. And there, it just was such a crossroads. The Visigoths were there. I mean, so many people have gone to Spain, and it is still a crossroads. And what fascinates me today is that it is still a pot that has all of these and embraces these wonderful cultures, whether they're African, they're Middle Eastern, they're Indian, they're other European countries. It is absolutely, absolutely fabulous. And of course, in Revenge in Barcelona, I tried to incorporate a little bit of that taste too. People from Africa, people from the Middle East, and the religions, because it is very rich in various religions too, because of the obvious uh, people that have come through over the centuries.
Yeah, through in the books. There was, I mean, it was everything, like you're saying, from the architecture to the religious history to paella to the smell of flowers that were, native to the region. And so it was, centrally speaking and historically and culturally speaking, it was a complete experience that Nikki was immersed in, and yet also had some history with herself, so that was very cool as well. With respect to Nikki now, is there a Nikki number 4 in the works?
There is, and I'm just starting to plot that out. And I have to credit you for making me plot my novels, because I used to be such a pantser. And of course, as you know, it takes a lot longer to write a book when you're a pantser, because you hit points when you say, well, now what?
Exactly.
So I'm switching over to being more of a plotter, and so I'm just starting to plot that Nikki number 4, and basically it will be based out of Miami, which is where her home office is, and then it will probably include Cuba, because I think that there's a wonderful connection between Miami and Cuba. But also because of the story that's beginning to develop, Cuba will be essential to that story, and it's exciting to start a new one.
Yeah, Miami also well, it doesn't have the history of a Barcelona, is a great cultural melting pot and a magnet for, or crossroads for, Latin America and the US. So and the Caribbean as well. There's a lot of cool things you can do with that. I'm excited to see what's up with it. Now, not only, by the way, guys, is Kathryn making a switch from being a pantser, writing by the seat of her pants, to a plotter, which means planning ahead, but she has another issue that she faces in writing that is an impediment to speed, and that is writing outside your native tongue. Is that still for you something that's more challenging?
Oh, it definitely is, because I will state things in English the way they're said in Spanish. So instead of saying fence posts, for example, I will say the posts of the fence. And that's the way you say it in Spanish. There's no
Right.
word for fence posts. It is the posts in the fence. So that kind of thing requires me to spend more time editing. And then when I finish editing my work, then of course it goes to an editor, because I really feel as that since I'm writing in a language that's not my very native tongue, that it needs to go to an editor. And then of course it goes to 4 or 5 beta readers. And then after that, I always hope that it will be as well crafted as possible. Uh, I have to laugh because I re-edited my second book, Danger in the Coyote Zone, and I found a mistake in it that no one had told me about. It went through 2 bilingual people that had been beta readers. My editor knows Spanish very well, although she's not fully bilingual, and it was where one of the characters arrives from Italy, and he leaves from one city to arrive in Mexico City, and 5 pages later, he has same trip. He has left a different city in Italy and arrived in a different city in Mexico City, and that is 5 pages apart. And I was horrified that no one had found it, and it had been published already. So,
But it tells you that people get into the story and that they're swept away by everything that makes a Kathryn Lane novel such an exciting and immersive read, right? I mean, they're like, okay, you know, just zooming right past it. So it's good you found it, but I can see how people could miss it. They're carried along with Nikki.
Well, I hadn't thought of it that way, and that's good. Thank you, Pamela.
There's always a silver lining. But I'm really excited for the next one. That sounds good.
But Nikki was actually born in Mexico, in the state of Oaxaca, which is southern Mexico, and her parents had moved to the U.S., moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, when she was still a young girl, and so she had kind of definitely had a bilingual life before she started working, and she lost her parents at a fairly early age, so she has an aunt in Barcelona, and that was the reason she had gone to Barcelona, was that she wanted to rekindle her friendship with her aunt. And I've been told that that Nikki is a lot like me. One person said, you know, I was reading your book, Waking Up in Medellin, and then I came to that love scene, and I said, oh my God, this is Kathryn. I can't read that. And so I moved on.
It's a sexy love scene.
But Nikki is not me. There's very little about her other than the kernel of truth. I have to say that there is one thing that she has that is similar to me, and that's a fear of heights. And that gets in the way a little bit from time to time. Not terribly, but it gets in the way a little bit. And as I'm plotting out the new book, I'm thinking that that's going to come back to haunt her a little bit more.
I love that. They've got to have a good flaw. And I was thinking, as you were talking about things like writing the post of the fence, you know, the writing in Spanish, that the rhythm of that with Nikki as a native Spanish speaker from Mexico, I'm not bothered by that so much. If there a little of that still, you know, ends up there, you think that's how Nikki would think it. That's how Nikki would say it. So I don't know. I get that flavor and that feel and that rhythm when I read your books. But as a reader, that would not bother me at all to read the post of the fence. I just thought
good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that, because I have always felt that it's one of my flaws, and yet I don't write in Spanish because the market's in English, and I live in the U.S. And my first book has been translated into Spanish. My former publisher wanted to have it translated into Spanish, and that one is being re-edited. In fact, my brother's a professional translator and editor, and he is re-editing it a little bit to make it just a little bit better in Spanish. But Spanish is a much wordier language. So you usually end up with books that are somewhere between 10 to 20% longer to tell the same story.
And how are they doing, the Spanish versions? Did it validate your feeling that the market's in English and write in English, or are they doing super well, or is the English versions doing better?
The English version has done much, much better. But then I have to say that the Spanish version really hasn't had the advertising. And I need to get behind that and start advertising that book and advertising it in the right places, because obviously if you're an English speaker primarily, you're going to be reading in English primarily, so you're not going to sell that book to people that speak English and perfectly and read in English. So I need to find the right avenues for that. And my former publisher, it was his first venture into doing that. And so there was minimal help there.
It's a very specialized thing, finding a way to get the right cover and the right advertising and the right copy or pitch to get books to sell in countries other than the one in which they were conceptualized and created in. And I haven't mastered it yet. I will say that I haven't mastered it, but I went with a publisher in Denmark for my Katie books, my Caribbean series, and they sell like mad in Danish over there, but they recreated everything. It's a different cover. The titles are different. The copy is different. The way they market it is about Danes. And so it's more than translation. So anyway, Kathryn and I have spent time together in working on the business of writing through my indie publishing retreats before. And so it would be very easy at this point to double the length of this podcast and just start talking strategy and marketing. However, we have reached the end of our allotted time. So we'll have to save that for a special version sometime and talk about everything we both learned. Kathryn, thank you so much for being on the show and talking to us.
And may I just say one thing, Pamela?
Yes, you may.
This week, for the next, I think it's 4 days, Revenge in Barcelona is on sale for 99 cents, the ebook on Amazon. So any listener that's interested in buying it might be able to pick it up very inexpensively right now.
So June 10th to 14th, 2020, you can get the ebook for Revenge in Barcelona for 99 cents.
99 cents.
Very good deal. You guys go out and take advantage of that one. And thank you for tuning in, everybody. I feel very privileged to share Kathryn with you, and I hope you'll really enjoy her books. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.